The whistle in cups clinked gently. Laughter laced the air, and for a fleeting moment, everything seemed serene. It was a performance of normalcy, but behind the soft smiles and curated elegance were decades of tension woven into every glance, every unspoken word. This wasn't just a garden party. It was a gathering of dynasties fractured by time, lineage, and legacy. In the heart of the garden's cheerful facade, the children danced through hedges and raced along the grass with an innocence the adults had long abandoned. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were joined by Camilla's grandchildren, blended into the royal fabric, but never truly sewn into its seams. They laughed without understanding the complexities of titles or succession. But that illusion of harmony, that delicate balance of blood and politics, cracked suddenly, violently, and without warning. Amid the laughter, the atmosphere shifted. Subtle at first, a tightening of Kate's jaw, a flicker of discomfort among the staff who had been trained to anticipate disaster before it struck. And then, like a ghost that couldn't be ignored, came Charlotte, no longer running, no longer laughing. Her small frame stood frozen beside her mother, her cheeks flushed red, her lips quivering, her wide eyes brimming with tears. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply clung to Kate's side, burying her face into the fabric of her mother's dress, as though the safety of her world had just collapsed. And in that moment, the crown's glittering facade shattered. Staff, trained to remain invisible, exchanged uneasy glances. The air turned cold despite the sunshine. The picnic wasn't over. It had simply transformed into something else, something darker. The kind of moment that never makes it into the official royal photo albums. The kind of moment that breaks through the fairy tale and exposes the raw, vulnerable truth hidden beneath centuries of crowns and protocol. Something had happened. Something small in appearance, but seismic in implication. The fracture wasn't visible to the public, but inside those palace gates it echoed like thunder. But what could drive a princess to tears in the middle of a royal garden party? The answer lay in 6 chilling words whispered like a dagger. A child's voice, too confident for her years, delivered the blow that fractured more than just a moment. It cracked the royal image. The laughter of cousins faded into the background as Eliza, Camilla's granddaughter, turned her attention to Charlotte, with the kind of precision that doesn't come from childish impulse. It comes from listening to adults whisper behind closed doors. It began with a smirk, a sideways glance, and a mockery that might have seemed harmless to any outsider. "Is that how real princesses bow?" she asked, referencing Charlotte's earlier curtsy, the same one Kate had gently instructed her to perfect before the gathering. The tone wasn't playful, it was measured, smug. Staff within earshot heard the remark, but did what they were trained to do. To intervene in royal affairs, even those involving children, was to cross an invisible line etched deep into palace tradition. Charlotte, raised in the careful spotlight of royal expectation, didn't respond. Her small face flickered with confusion first, then discomfort, but it didn't stop there. Eliza, emboldened by the silence around her, struck again. "That dress looks like it came from a store, not a palace." She scoffed, her voice low but loud enough to carry. It was a jab, not just at Charlotte's clothes, but at her mother's choices. Subtle condemnation passed down like a family heirloom. Still, Charlotte said nothing. She simply stood there, taking it all in, her composure slowly fracturing. But then came the sentence that would echo beyond the hedges and reach the ears of Britain itself. Eliza leaned in, her words cold and final. "Your mommy is just pretending to be queen. Mine's the real one." That was the moment the air changed. The kind of remark that pierces deeper than teasing it was a declaration, a reflection of the whispered hierarchy within the palace walls. It wasn't the opinion of a child, it was the voice of an institution. passed down and echoed through a little girl too young to understand the storm she'd just unleashed. Charlotte didn't argue, she didn't cry out or retaliate. Instead, her face dropped, her lips trembled, and her eyes welled with tears that she tried to blink away. Slowly, quietly, she turned from the playground politics and walked toward her mother, broken, betrayed, and bewildered. And though the staff stood nearby, their training held them back. They had seen distress before, but never like this. Not this raw, not this point. Because what happened in that garden wasn't about children misbehaving. It was about power, legacy, and a royal system at war with itself. Charlotte didn't fight back, but the storm behind her silence was about to change royal history. Kate didn't shout, but her silence thundered through Windsor's walls. As Charlotte collapsed into her embrace, Kate's arms wrapped around her daughter with quiet urgency. No royal commands, no dramatic gestures, just instinct. She shielded Charlotte from the stares, from the speculation, and from the invisible weight of lineage that had just wounded her child. At that moment, Kate wasn't the Princess of Wales. She was a mother. And in her silence, there was a power that shook the very foundations of the royal order. She didn't demand attention. She didn't seek justice in the eyes of the staff. Instead, she withdrew with her daughter, vanishing behind the stone corridors of Windsor's private wing, carrying with her a storm that had yet to break. Inside, away from prying eyes, Kate knelt beside Charlotte and wiped away the tears no photographer would ever capture. She offered words meant only for her daughter's ears. Gentle, comforting, firm. She told her that she was loved, that she was royal not because of a crown or a title, but because of who she was. It wasn't the first time Kate had seen the cold edge of condescension in royal circles, but this time it cut too close to home. The wound wasn't hers, it was her daughter's, and that changed everything. The patience she had practiced for years, the quiet tolerance for smirks, for passing remarks, for carefully disguised disdain dissolved in that moment. Because when cruelty trickled down to children, it wasn't court politics anymore. It was personal. With composure that masked the fury burning beneath, Kate requested a private word with Camilla. No fanfare, no staff, just two women bound by the same crown, but divided by a history of tension and quiet rivalry. Kate didn't accuse. She didn't demand apologies. She simply laid bare the facts. Eliza's words weren't harmless. They weren't random. They echoed a mindset that had been allowed to linger too long within the palace walls, but Camilla, ever polished, brushed it aside with a tight-lipped smile. "We mustn't be so sensitive about playground squabbles, dear," she replied, her voice cool with practiced ease. That sentence sealed everything. To Kate, it wasn't just indifference, it was betrayal. She left the conversation not in defeat, but with a newfound resolve, the kind that doesn't scream, it acts, and she wasn't alone. Word of the incident reached Princess Anne, who had seen the monarchy through every evolution, every scandal, every restructuring of power. Her words were few, but they landed like stone. "No child," she said firmly, "regardless of rank, should ensure that kind of treatment." Anne's quiet endorsement wasn't just support, it was permission. Permission to reject silence, to confront the shadows that had long been allowed to linger unchecked behind royal formality. And as Kate returned to her private quarters that night, her fury remained cloaked in dignity, but it was no longer quiet. But as Kate's silence grew firm, William's fury, controlled but explosive, was only just beginning to simmer. When William's eyes met Charlotte's tear-stained face, a prince transformed into a father and a decision-maker. In that instant, the regal veneer melted away, and what remained was a man silently shaken by what he saw. He didn't rush. He didn't make a scene. He simply watched, registering the tremble in Charlotte's small hands as she clung to Kate, the look of confusion twisted with shame. The kind of look no child should ever wear. especially not within their own family. Something deep within William shifted. It wasn't anger in the traditional sense, it was a quiet, profound reckoning. The air had changed, a line had been crossed, and he felt it in his bones. Without alerting the rest of the family, William discreetly pulled aside the senior staff who had witnessed the exchange. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence was enough, calm but unwavering. He asked for every detail: what was said, how it was said, and how it was received. The responses didn't shock him. They confirmed what he had feared all along. This wasn't an isolated moment of childish cruelty. It was the latest in a series of subtle digs, cruel taunts, and private whispers that had long been ignored, tolerated, and swept under the rug. The truth became undeniable. Camilla's grandchildren had, over time, begun to absorb a sense of entitlement that was emboldened by proximity, not principle. William walked the gardens alone that evening, his thoughts spiraling into a quiet storm. He thought not just about Charlotte, but about what it meant to raise heirs to the crown in a world that no longer bows to legacy. He remembered the traditions he'd been taught to uphold, the invisible codes of loyalty, inclusion, and protection that held the monarchy together. But now, those very codes felt compromised. The crown had always drawn lines between royal and non-royal, blood and marriage, duty and privilege. But somewhere along the way, those lines had blurred, and the price was now written across his daughter's face. He didn't see this as retaliation. He saw it as preservation. What good was the crown if it allowed even its youngest members to be torn down by those who stood beside it but didn't carry its burden? What message was the monarchy sending if it permitted quiet cruelty, simply because it came from within the family circle? William knew that if he didn't act now, the rot would spread. His decision wouldn't be emotional, it would be ethical, it wouldn't be loud, it would be final, and it wouldn't be made for the cameras, it would be made for the future. Because in that one moment of heartbreak, the veil had lifted. This wasn't just about Charlotte. It was about the soul of the institution she was born into. By the next dawn, William didn't wait for palace protocol, he rewrote it. Behind closed doors, William made a move that shook the crown, one that history will not forget. There were no royal photographers summoned, no carefully crafted press releases, no delicate language to cushion the blow. This wasn't a performance for public favor. It was a reckoning long overdue. Hours after Charlotte's tears stained the fabric of Windsor's calm, William summoned his most trusted advisers to Kensington Palace. No titles were invoked, no ceremony observed, just a prince, no, a future king standing at the precipice of change. What unfolded in that quiet room wasn't just a meeting, it was the dismantling of a long-accepted lie. That proximity to power equaled worthiness of it. With firm conviction and eyes that betrayed no hesitation, William issued the order. Camilla's granddaughter, Eliza, would no longer be welcomed as part of the royal inner circle. Access revoked, invitations rescinded. Her name was removed from ceremonial guest lists and private family functions alike. The privileges she once enjoyed, not through merit, but by association, were gone. Not out of spite, not as revenge, but as a message, a symbolic declaration that the crown, under his future leadership, would no longer shelter those who disrespected the very values it claimed to represent. William knew the optics would be divisive, the whispers loud, but the truth was louder. Credibility cannot be inherited, only earned. He didn't mince words. Being near royalty isn't the same as being royal, he said, a line that landed like a gavel, echoing through the halls of monarchy. It wasn't about bloodlines, it was about behavior. For too long, blurred boundaries had allowed individuals adjacent to the throne to assume power, to wield influence, and to cross lines without consequence. William wasn't just correcting a mistake, he was rewriting the standard. The crown, he insisted, would no longer serve as a safe haven for arrogance disguised as entitlement. His daughter's pain had exposed a crack in the palace foundation, and instead of plastering over it, he chose to rebuild from that fracture. The move was swift, clinical, and absolute. No further discussion was entertained, no negotiations. William had no interest in appeasing those who viewed inclusion as an entitlement. To him, this wasn't about a child's comment. It was about a culture that had allowed condescension to flourish, unchecked, within sacred spaces. By removing Eliza's privileges, he wasn't punishing a child. He was protecting the future. He was restoring the dignity of an institution increasingly questioned by the public it serves. The monarchy, he believed, must evolve or perish, and that evolution began with a single, irreversible act of integrity. But as William drew the line, the backlash came fast, and from within his own walls, Camilla expected support from her king, but instead found silence sharper than any rebuke. The moment William's decision echoed through the palace corridors, Camilla stormed into Clarence's house, her composure fraying at the edges. She didn't wait for a scheduled meeting. She didn't knock politely. She demanded answers, demanded loyalty, demanded that King Charles undo what she saw as an unforgivable slight, not just to her granddaughter, but to her. She believed she had earned her place, rebuilt her image from the ashes of scandal, and embedded her family into the very structure of royal life. Now, with a single decision, it felt as if all of it had been undone. But when she looked to Charles, her partner, her supposed protector, she was met not with resolve, but restraint. Charles, weary from years of balancing family fractures and national scrutiny, said little. His silence wasn't indifference, it was strategy. He understood the political cost of interfering. To challenge William's authority, especially now, would be to fracture the monarchy from within. But Camilla didn't see caution. She saw betrayal. In her eyes, Charles had chosen the crown over her. His lack of defense cut deeper than any public scandal ever had. And it wasn't just about Eliza. It was about everything Camilla had sacrificed, endured, and clawed her way through to be where she was. And now she was watching it slip through her fingers, without so much as a word from the man who once promised her the world. The emotional fallout was immediate. Behind closed doors, Camilla unraveled. The queen consort, who had once stared down tabloid storms and public condemnation, now found herself questioning her place in the very palace she helped reshape. The whispers grew louder. She reportedly considered stepping back from royal duties, not officially, not yet, but the idea took root, perhaps out of exhaustion, perhaps out of humiliation, or perhaps out of the aching realization that despite her title, she had never been fully embraced by the institution she married in. That realization, once buried beneath appearances and ceremonies, now rose like a tide she could no longer push back. And in her isolation, Camilla's anger turned sharply toward Kate. She believed Kate had weaponized Charlotte's tears, using maternal sympathy as a political scalpel. To Camilla, it was all too precise, Kate's silence, her calm, her timing. It felt orchestrated, cold, a quiet dismantling of everything Camilla had built. She saw not a mother defending her child, but a future queen reclaiming space that Camilla believed was rightfully hers. And worst of all, William's speed only fueled the suspicion. Camilla didn't need a press release to feel the shifting of power. She felt it in her exclusion, in the sudden halt of invitations, in the silence that surrounded her where there was once praise. But the palace gates couldn't contain this story. The world was already watching, and the public had chosen its side. The tabloids roared, but it was the parents, not the princes, who led the charge. The moment Charlotte's tearful retreat became public knowledge, the media pounced. Headlines screamed across the globe. Protect Charlotte. Royal rift deepens. William acts like a true father. not just a future king. But this wasn't just another palace scandal for the gossip columns to feast on. This was different. The outrage didn't come from royal watchers alone. It came from parents, teachers, families who saw something all too familiar in Charlotte's pain. In a world so often divided by class and status, that moment bridged the gap. For once, royalty didn't seem untouchable. It seemed real. And that reality resonated more than any press release or polished public appearance ever could. Social media exploded in solidarity. Hashtags like #Protect Charlotte, #Not Just a Princess, and #Hi Future King William dominated global timelines. Memes gave way to essays. Influencers who rarely touched politics were now championing the way William had handled the crisis. Parenting blogs dissected the event not as a royal drama, but as a moment of moral clarity. Kate and William were no longer figures of distant protocol. They were now seen as parents who had made a difficult but necessary call, putting their child's dignity before palace unity. That shift in perception was seismic. The couple had always walked the tightrope between tradition and relatability. But now the balance tipped decisively in their favor. Eliza, once an unnoticed child of the extended royal web, quickly became the face of unchecked privilege, not for who she was, but for what she had come to represent. Her words, while spoken in youth, reflected a mindset many had suspected lingered within the royal establishment. A mindset where proximity to power, bred entitlement, and Charlotte, in contrast, became the silent symbol of grace under fire. She never lashed out. She never spoke publicly. But her vulnerability did what no royal speech ever could. It humanized the monarchy in a way no orchestrated PR campaign ever achieved. Silence became more powerful than any crown. Commentators, analysts, even critics of the monarchy began speaking with a rare tone of admiration. William's choice wasn't reactive. It was principled. He hadn't moved to punish a child. He had moved to protect the future of the monarchy itself. And in doing so, he did what few in the institution had ever dared. He held the mirror up to his own family and chose reform over tradition. This was the moment the public realized they weren't just witnessing a family feud. They were witnessing a quiet revolution, one rooted not in policy, but in values. And through it all, Camilla found herself cast in a role she thought she had outgrown, that of the outsider. To many, she represented not just the old guard, but the resistance to change. The silence from Charles, the action from William, and the strength from Kate exposed a shift in power, and the public embraced it. They didn't rally around bloodlines. They rallied around empathy, responsibility, and authenticity. And yet, beneath the noise of headlines, a deeper shift was quietly taking root, one that could redefine monarchy itself. This wasn't about a scandal. It was the birth of a monarchy built on values, not vanity. In the aftermath of William's decisive action, a quiet transformation began to ripple through the institution. It wasn't announced with fanfare. It didn't come draped in velvet or adorned with jewels, but it was unmistakable. Something fundamental had shifted. William had not merely responded to a moment of hurt. He had drawn a new line in the sand. He made it clear that titles, traditions, and ancestry were no longer enough to belong to the monarchy now. One had to embody its principles. Being royal, in his view, wasn't about inherited status. It was about earned respect. The gesture, though rooted in personal pain, became a proclamation of purpose, a rejection of vanity in favor of integrity. This wasn't a temporary flare of reform. It was a turning point. Royal historians, long accustomed to tracking lineage and protocol, began using a different language. They spoke of evolution, not preservation, for generations. The monarchy had survived by walking the tightrope of tradition and public expectation. But William's decision marked a departure from that precarious balancing act. It was the moment the institution stopped clinging to the past and began confronting its future. And at the heart of this evolution stood a man who had learned through scandal, scrutiny, and now through fatherhood, that the only way forward was to lead with principle, not pretense. Beside him, Kate's presence became a symbol of that shift. She didn't speak publicly. She didn't grant interviews, but her silence carried weight. Her refusal to retaliate, her choice to comfort instead of confront, made her a moral force within the palace. She had been underestimated before, seen as too composed, too careful, too perfect. But now, that restraint was being recognized as strength. She didn't need to raise her voice to change the tone of the institution. All she had to do was stand beside her daughter, and by doing so, she exposed the fractures within the royal hierarchy and challenged the institution to be better. She didn't just support William's vision, she helped define it. Palace insiders, typically guarded and resistant to change, began to whisper something different. This was a blueprint, a new model, a monarchy that didn't rely on mystique or grandeur, but on credibility. William and Kate had shown what leadership looked like in the modern age, not through declarations, but through decisions. Not through pageantry, but through personal accountability. They didn't run from controversy, they met it head-on. And in doing so, they restored something the crown desperately needed: public faith. Because the world wasn't asking for perfection anymore. It was asking for purpose. The public no longer wanted staged ceremonies and scripted smiles. They wanted something real, something human. And for the first time in a long time, they saw it not in the robes, but in the resolve. Not in the tradition, but in the transformation. But even as the palace adapted, the world was asking the question no crown can ignore. What does it really mean to be royal in the 21st century? And who truly deserves that title? That question, once whispered behind palace doors, erupted into global conversation. It wasn't just about protocol anymore. It was about purpose. The moment Charlotte's tears became public knowledge, the world was forced to confront the unspoken truths hidden beneath centuries of tradition. For all its grandeur, for all its ceremony, the monarchy had always relied on one fragile illusion, that bloodline equaled legitimacy. But now, that belief stood exposed. What mattered wasn't who you descended from. It was what you stood for. And in the echo of a child's humiliation, a deeper truth emerged. The crown could no longer shield those who failed to embody the very values it claimed to uphold. The fallout from that garden party wasn't just emotional, it was cultural. Across newsrooms, classrooms, dinner tables, and digital platforms, debates ignited. Should children born into privilege be held accountable for actions shaped by their environment? Should marriage alone grant royal entitlement? And at the core of it all, how do we define who belongs within the palace gates? Charlotte, in her silence, became the symbol of something far greater than the petty cruelty of a cousin. She became the embodiment of modern vulnerability. Her tears pierced through layers of royal mystique, revealing the human heart beating beneath the golden armor. And that truth, once seen, could not be unseen. The public didn't just sympathize, they demanded change. They no longer looked to royalty for perfection. They looked for authenticity. They didn't want fairy tales, they wanted truth. And in William and Kate, they saw exactly that. Not a polished portrait of tradition, but a living example of what principled leadership could look like. William's decision wasn't a PR maneuver. It was a risk, a challenge to the status quo. And Kate's quiet strength was its foundation. Together, they didn't just respond to the crisis, they redefined what it meant to wear a crown in a world that questions power more than it praises it. In doing so, they set a new royal standard, not one based on inheritance, but on integrity, not on ceremony, but on action. The message was unmistakable. To lead in this new era, you must do more than carry a title. You must carry the weight of accountability. And while the palace may remain draped in history, its future now hinges on the very thing it once feared the most, one where titles are no longer shields and access is no longer given out of courtesy, but earned through principle. This wasn't the story of a family feud. It was the reckoning of an institution. And as the world watched, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just about a princess in tears. It was about a crown finding its conscience and a family choosing love over legacy. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.